Hello everyone. In order to change things up a bit on the YouTube channel, I've decided to do a video about production techniques and especially to break down one of my tracks, something that came out some time ago. It was an EP, so that's the first track of that EP, which is called Loop1. I decided to break down that track in particular because it's well, basically, you know how I'm always banging on about maximize your one sound source, and this one was really a proof of concept about that, where I really just used one sound source and drums, of course. So we'll go through the plugins I've used, the processing I've applied, and how I went for the arrangement as well, which you'll see is pretty simple. I settled on this track because, first of all, I still quite like it, which is not the case with all the tracks I put out. I guess everyone is having that struggle. I still like the track, and it's been one of the tracks that was the most played by DJs in podcast or whatever. So it's always nice when you see your track being played by others. A video on production techniques has been asked quite a few times by my dear Patreon supporters, as well as people in the comments. So I hope this will help a bit and see how my process is and basically demystify stuff, because sometimes you hear a track, you're thinking, oh, this must be so complicated. Well, you'll see there's not much anything complicated in there. I'm not a production wizard, I'm not a studio expert, it's just how I've done this track a while ago. I guess I might have progressed a bit since then, but the most of the ideas are the same, and I think easily transferable to whatever you have. So let's dive right into it. It's going to be a bit computer heavy, of course. I'll go over the modules I've used, but it's mostly going to be computer stuff. See you. Okay, so this is my Ableton Session. It's pretty dark. The tempo of the track is 138, which I think at the time was probably one of the fastest track I've done. I think these days 138 is sort of my default tempo, but who knows, maybe I'll slow it down again. Techno these days is pretty fast, so I think 138 is a good middle ground. You can always make it slower, make it faster with the pitch wheel of whatever you're playing the track with. And I mean, it doesn't feel too fast. It's quite fast, but it's okay. So I usually group my stuff in like the Alphabase. They all of the outputs have their own in my Motu 16A interface. Here I've deleted tracks I haven't used. So there's a kick, closed hat, open hat, tom, and the output of the samples in the Alphabase, which is another hat. So that's for the drums. Then we have one stereo track for the Bach filter, one stereo track for the complex oscillator, which is the main sound. And this is just the return from my El Capistan. I recorded just so if I come back later to my Ableton project and I move the settings, well, at least it's printed. This is just my voice. This is the clock out, which I use to clock my modular. And I usually have 3 sends. Back then I had my pedals on top of my modular case, and I had the Eventide Space, the Eventide H9, and the Strymon El Capistan. So let's dive into the sounds. Let's start with the Alphabase. The kick, when I record the track, I record it one go. So everything is on its own channel of the interface, and I just play the track. That's why on the kick channel, it's a 6 minute or 5 minutes chunk, and it's not a loop of 4 kicks. Even if there's a small tiny variety in my kicks, because the Alphabase is an analog machine, they will be printed, which I like. So here's the kick. It's quite long. If you zoom in on the waveform, you can see that's a long, boomy kick. It's kind of 808 but with a big click. That's the kick, really nothing crazy. As for processing, I have used the Elysia Music Q, which I really like. The Elysia plugins, especially the Music Q and the compressor, are great. And there's actually a preset which is called 909 Kick Booster. It bears its name pretty well. So let's hear the kick without the 909 Kick Booster. Still quite punchy, but here it is with the EQ. It removes a bit of mids and really pushes the click through and removes some of the mud. So yeah, it doesn't work with everything, but if you have a 909 typed kick, of course, it will work. I just said mine was more 808, but yeah, still, I think it worked here. Next, I'll move to the closed hat. So you'll be surprised to hear it's a closed hat. Same thing, it's the whole recording for the whole track. And there's a little bit of reverb on it, but I haven't used any EQ or anything, which usually I remove the lows from the hats. Then yeah, usually I will put an EQ like that, the basic Ableton EQ on most of my hat channel, just because sometimes you never know in these percussion, they can be hidden low frequencies, which really all they do is eat up headroom and mess with compressors. So yeah, just remove anything under 100 and you'll be fine. So here's the hat pattern, open hat. Again, with some reverb. On the Alphabase, you can hear the accents. I think the accents on the Alphabase are very expressive. Then one of the main sound of the track, and basically what is used to, well, fill the gaps in between the kicks and make sort of a rumble, if you like. So that's the toms. The toms are quite processed heavy. They basically run the entire length of the track with no change. So let's hear the sound. So there's a delay on that, which really gives the tick 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 on top of the sound, which I quite like. That's without the delay. It removes a bit of low end as well, because as you can see, as I've EQ'd my repeats of the delay to just take the higher frequencies. Then there's a distortion plugin by Ableton, which is really nice, the pedal, which really gives volume and teeth and grit. This is the overdrive. Of course, you can distort or fuzz. They all sound nice, and you have bass, mid, treble control, which really is nice. You can add sub. It's nice to have distortion that doesn't eat all your bass. I think it's really useful. Next, I have an EQ just to remove the very low frequencies. There's a peak here which I don't really cut, but I cut below the kick. The peak, sorry. And next is a plugin which I love and use a lot, is Track Spacer. I think I've talked about that in a previous video, but I use that to sidechain with the kick. So I'll bring the kick as well so you can. So it's a bit of an hybrid EQ and compressor. You can choose where you stop the effect. So I have a big high cut and I'm stopping the effect at 132, so 128. So everything that's higher than that doesn't get compressed or EQ'd, but everything that's below that gets compressed with whatever sidechain you like. You can freeze the settings, and you have a bit more control here with mid-side, attack, release, panning, which honestly I never use. I like the simplicity of the 3 knobs. It's an amazing tool. Here is my X sample, so that's more simple hats, like airy hats from the Alphabase. The reverb in there is the internal reverb of the Alphabase, which I don't use that much, but sometimes if it sounds good, you know, whatever. So that's it for drums. If we play all the drums together, oops. So now let's move to the main sounds, or at least the main synth sound, which is the complex oscillator amp and tone multi-delay processor I know and love. But there's quite a bit of a complex feedback chain going on with the multi-delay processor, and that's really what helped me have a much fuller sound and just be able to not use anything else as far as synth go. So let's listen to that track. There's only track spacer here. Once again, sidechain with the whole of the Alphabase apparently. Maybe I've changed that, or maybe it was just a kick. And a utility to make the bass mono at 150 Hertz, which is a good common practice on synth line, bass line. You don't want too much stereo on the bass frequencies. So you can hear all those going around. These are feedback from the multi-delay processor, and the feedback was going through a noise and filter, and I chose different outputs of the noise and filter to go back into the multi-delay processor. So that's why the feedback is not always the same in moving. It's not a constant feedback, it's just sometimes. I've talked about that in plenty of videos. You know, there are some bursts of feedback like that, which I really like. So we just heard there's an automation on the reverb, which by itself doesn't sound really good, but in the track it happens before there's a hat coming in. So this is just a simple trick, but it always sounds pretty good. And the other sound, and that's going to be the last sound, is the bark filter. So the bark filter was an output from the multi-delay processor, which I reused. So basically still the same sound source going through the delay, and I put that through the bark filter processor, and I animated the bands of the bark filter processor with random signals coming from the random sampling. I made a small Instagram post at the time when I recorded that track. I'll post it in the video, and you'll see the bark filter bands are really moving, and that's what you hear right now. It's an output from the multi-delay processor that's filtered to fit with the other line. So these two together, it doesn't clash with the first one. It's just there to add ambience and atmosphere. Both of these are going through Al Capistan, and the bark filter, the atmospheric output, has also some side chaining from track spacer, an EQ to remove the lower frequencies at under 100, a compressor to keep it in check, because given the random signal was moving the bark filter bands, sometimes there could be some pretty harsh bursts of sound, so the compressor is really useful for that. And just an auto panning to slightly move it around the head, but nothing crazy. So that's these two sounds, which are really the main elements of the track. And now there's the Al cap return, which basically is just what its name implies. I like to do that when you have a track, you are happy with the effect, especially if it's mostly if it's hardware pedals. If you don't finish the track right away, just record your return tracks so you can play with them afterwards. Speaking of return tracks, I usually put a compressor on the reverb to sidechain it with the kick. It's always a cool effect, and it removes a bit of the reverb and puts it out of the way. And it also, once again, EQ just the lower frequencies. You can do that on the Eventide reverb, but I think it's just much easier to just slap Ableton EQ on this. Here it's quite the same for the H9 and same for the Al Capistan. I put the bass in mono and EQ the lower frequencies. I use Sonarworks for my speakers, and I will put the overstayer on the master just for my pleasure, but then when I export the track, I will remove the overstayer on the master, and then we will go through another Ableton session where I put every of these tracks through the overstayer to add a little bit of something to every track, and then I will run once again every of those tracks through the overstayer to sum everything and boost everything and make it sound the best it can. So that's the track complete without the overstayer, without any processing other than just we just described. No outboard gear, so let's hear it. The Al Capistan really gives the sense of space and stereo. Same with the Bark filter, the atmospheric thing. You can tell sounds are where they need to be, but it's definitely lacking punch. It sits at -8 dB around there, but maybe the peaks are -6. So that's a good place to shoot for. You can always just gain the stage if everything is too loud, of course. Nothing really clashes with each other, it's just that it needs a good punch, and the overstayer is going to provide that. So let's go to the other Ableton session. So here's the arrangement of my track. As you can see, it's pretty simple. I recorded everything in one go. I just cut the silence where they were. I didn't move anything around really. It's just how things were recorded. So what we have here is the sounds, or are the sounds that I ran individually through the overstayer. So what I do is export all of my individual tracks, put them in a new session. I don't add anything, EQs or plugins. The composition at this point is done, and here is just to basically resample everything through my outboard gear. So in this case, the modular channel overstayer. And so I ran everything through it: the kick, the closed hat, open hat, tom, the bark, and the complex oscillator, as well as my return from Al Capistan. And once I have run every track through it, I re-sum everything through the overstayer. And it's incremental gain every time, but at the end, it really sounds much better. So that's how my sound after the overstayer processing. Maybe you won't hear much difference on the individual sounds, but on the master it does make a difference. So here's the kick, still very long. My hats, and here I've high-passed the hats with the overstayer because it has a filter, so that's what I've used. Then the toms. I do think the toms sound much more powerful after the overstay as well, with some distortion added. You can hear a slight noise floor which is being compressed by the overstayer, which I think really adds texture and atmosphere. Really love that when you push the makeup gain. Then that's the bark filter processor. And the main synth line, which is the complex oscillator. And when you put everything together, me again. I hope this video was enjoyable to watch and that you gain a few tips to use in your own production maybe. I intend to do a few other ones on that subject. I think it's a good change from the classic module demos, which are not going anywhere, don't worry. I have plenty of modules to cover still, so I'll see you in the next one. If you really enjoyed the video, you can of course go to the Patreon page, subscribe. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, leave a comment. It's always really, really appreciated. Bye.